Joining us now, Michael Allen, a former senior National Security Council advisor to President George W. Bush. Michael, it's great seeing you. Just listening to the Prime Minister yesterday referring to President Trump. Take a listen to this.
My message is we want to work with you. We want to welcome you to Britain. We want a new partnership because our history shows that when we work together, great things happen.
How much, I guess, sway do you think Europe, UK, has over President Trump? You know, we saw Macron there, and there was like this back and forth on who's got the strongest, nicest handshake. And then it seems as though as this goes on, Michael, we're seeing that the President of the United States has been having emissaries meet with Russian emissaries, but not in Europe. Today was in Turkey, but in Saudi Arabia.
Right. Well, I think that the EU leaders and the UK leader coming today have some impact on Donald Trump. It may not be decisive, however, because President Trump is calling his own plays, very much wants to try to get along with what we might call the great powers, Russia and China. He's even tried to get a deal with a lesser power like Iran. But I think it's great that they're visiting. I think it's great that Prime Minister Starmer announced that they want to up their military spending to 2.5% of GDP. I think it's terrific if he repeats that the UK and probably France are willing to deploy troops, peacekeeping troops, that is, to Ukraine as part of a security assurance final settlement if there is indeed a ceasefire or a peace deal. So I think as long as the Europeans are throwing out ideas and seeming to come to the table, it's a good thing and helpful in terms of persuading Donald Trump which way to go.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and I keep thinking, is there a new access of influence kind of emerging as the President of the United States clearly is not only willing, but very eager, it seems, to reestablish communication with the Russian leader. But then also, you know, it's more than just symbolic that the first meeting that the administration has with the Russians is carried out in Riyadh with the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia in that table. And then today, you know, Turkey, which has totally different relationship within the European Union, right? I mean, it is, after all, the border between Europe and Asia. But it seems as though Europe, for the President of the United States, has lost its significant weight.
I think that's right. And I think that's indicative of a larger conversation that the Europeans have been having at least since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They're saying to themselves that, and acknowledging even, that they've underspent badly on military spending. The Germans have even had to face a reckoning about their oil and gas imports from Russia. So I do think that they're in the middle of a dramatic change and a dramatic reconception of European security. And as long as they continue to move to a position of taking more ownership of what they do, I think they can sort of earn their way back into U.S. military and strategic planning, at least in not just in Europe, but even around the globe. Because I think what Donald Trump, at the end of the day, and we all know this from his first term and beyond, very much sees things in terms of, are our allies pitching in, or are they just free riding on the United States? And if it's just a free riding situation, that's going to irritate the president, and he's going to do something about it.
Yeah, and then the whole issue, for example, bringing that part of your conversation into what's going to happen tomorrow, right? I mean, this rare earth minerals deal that the U.S. and Ukraine are supposedly signing tomorrow when Zelensky visits the president in the White House. I mean, how unusual is a joint venture agreement going forward based on what the United States gave a country in military and social assistance.
Well, it's quite unusual, although I can think of a couple of historical parallels, at least, you know, in the run up to World War II. I remember FDR traded about 50 obsolete destroyers to the British in exchange for some islands in the Western Hemisphere. So some of this has happened in the past. I get that people are calling it coldly exploitative, but I think that if you support Ukraine and you want Ukraine to get additional equipment from the United States, it's good if Donald Trump can explain to the people, just as FDR had to explain to the people, that it's not just the United States giving things without anything in return, that there is a strategic minerals deal that over time can benefit the United States, not just financially, but of course, actually using and diversifying our supplies to critical minerals, which we need for all sorts of national security reasons. So at the end of the day, look, this is a win-win. Ukraine can say that the economic superpower of the world has made a huge anchor investment in Ukraine. They'll probably have a gold rush effect over there, by the way, with others saying if the United States is in there, we want to get in there too. So ultimately, I do honestly believe it is a good situation for Ukraine and a good situation for the United States.
But the only way that anything like that could be a reality is if there is no Russian invasion into Ukraine. We're coming into the fourth year, you know? I mean, it's that prospect and how any resolving of that war, you know, what it could mean, because it seems as though what any peace agreement would include for Ukraine could very well determine how foreign investors in the future see Ukraine.
You're exactly right. They're not going to go in unless there's some measure of security assurances that the West have issued to Ukraine. I'm hopeful, and I don't know if Putin will ultimately agree to this in final status negotiations, if you will, but I'm hopeful that if the Europeans can be the peacekeeping force and the United States and Europe can guarantee there'll be a steady flow of weapons for many, many years into the future, that might be good enough, at least to get a ceasefire for some period of time to satisfy President Trump that he's stopped killing. But there's a lot to be worked out, and I agree it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, you know, I hadn't really thought about that FDR moment. You know, I keep thinking about, you know, the Marshall Plan that had no strings attached, or you know, the Berlin Airlift that had no strings attached. But yeah, there was what the United States gave the UK at those moments weren't exactly, as you mentioned, I mean, top of the line stuff, but it was the opening, I guess, to what ended up being, you know, the important contribution of the United States.
You're right. It was symbolic of U.S. support. Yeah. You're right.
Michael Allen, thank you very much. Appreciate it. It's great talking to you.